Now it's time to dive in right into our speaker, Shanta Patton-Golar. Shanta is an 18-year real estate expert, a national real estate media contributor, a well-known leader in her community, CEO of Patton and Associates Real Estate Group, 2021 NAREB, which is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, Region 15, Vice President Directors and National Education. Chair of the NAREB. Please give it up and welcome our speaker, Ms. Shanta.
Time, and I don't have that. I only have about 30 minutes. So we're going to hop straight into this. And we know that with history, there are times of celebration, but we also know that there are times of disparity. So in order to get to the other side, we will need to go through all of it. Okay, so we'll have, it's like a great movie, right? There's a plot, there's always suspense, and hopefully on ways to a happy ending. Thank you. So a lot of times, first let's start. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, okay? So a lot of times when we think, that's okay. I'm going to leave that there. There's always another way, right? So a lot of times when we think about disparity and Black homeownership, when we also think about slavery and how long ago that was. And so when I was thinking about this presentation, I wanted to put it into something that you could actually relate to. And so doing my history and learning my history from my parents, especially my mom, who's very into, making sure ancestry is documented and everything. I then realized that a lot of us know our grandparents. We might still have our grandparents. Some even might still have their great-grandparents. And in this case, my great-great-grandparents were slaves. I'm 40 years old and my great-great-grandparents were slaves. So when you think about it in that perspective, it wasn't quite that long ago. And so I'm here to take you through generations of Shanta's family, from my great-grandparents to my great-great-grandparents to my great-grandparents to my grandparents to my parents, to me, and to my children. And I'm going to do that in 30 minutes, okay? So during this time, we know that this was the age of true disparity. During this time, whites owned land, family-owned businesses, crops, and Black people. Poorer whites were farmers, laborers, but they still were placed above the racial hierarchy. At this particular time, 1 in 7 Americans were owned by another American. During that time, on the left, they earned wealth, their families were intact. On the right, they were kidnapped, enslaved, separated from families. They were building America, including the White House, that has since only seen one person of color as president. They were servants and cooks, blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, caretakers of children. There were common instances of their babies being taken from them, but them still forced to breastfeed other babies. They were commodities, they were bought, and they were sold. Those are my great-grandparents. While Blacks were building America, whites were building wealth. Let that sit for a second. 1 in 7 Americans were owned by another American. During that time, whites owned what is roughly $4 billion in human capital. As time came, we did start to see us get closer to the end of slavery. Here's a fun fact. Seneca Village was primarily a Black-owned village in Manhattan. It had 225 residents, mostly Black. They had 3 churches, a Black school, and a cemetery. At that point, if you needed to own home and have the right to vote, Black men had to own at least $250 of property and had been a resident of that state for at least 3 years. During that time, though, eminent domain was still alive. It's what we know as eminent domain today. They used eminent domain, the state of New York, to completely wipe out Seneca Village. Of the residents in Seneca Village, at least 70% of them owned the land. They had really prospered during this time. This Seneca Village today is called Central Park. But prior to the state taking that land through eminent domain, it was Seneca Village. It was one of the only areas that were built Black and owned. They used this opportunity to get out of what was normally the city so that they could minimize the disparity in racial injustice that they were dealing with at that time. So as you can see, even though there's a pattern of us getting away from slavery, there's adversity still there on what we call economic detours. The opportunity for economic growth and then a detour happening to keep Blacks from being there. The next are my great-grandparents. A new birth of freedom. This was only 173 to potentially 123 years ago. But if you have a grandmother or a great-grandma who has the blessing of living until 101, they've seen quite a lot. It doesn't seem that far away any longer. General Sherman had the opportunity to meet with 20 Black pastors in this home, which is now a historical site. General Sherman posed a question at that time, which is, slavery is about to be abolished. What do you want? Kind of their version of reparations. What do you want? And at that time, slaves said this: we just want a plot of land that we can work until we make enough money to buy it from you. So even though the opportunity should have been for them to say, give us the land that we have worked as slaves this whole time, they did not do that. They simply said, give us enough land to plow and to tend to until we can make enough money to buy it from you. That then became 40 acres and a mule. But unfortunately, during that time, Lincoln was assassinated. And that was what we call now the first missed opportunity for economic growth in the Black community. Now, as we move forward, the short-lived promise of 40 acres and a mule, as the Civil War was ending, recently freed Blacks were promised land. That land was going to be divided and given to them from their slave owners. That land would be taken from them and given to the slaves. Some of them even received that land during that time. And then once Lincoln was assassinated, the land was taken back and given back to the slave owners. But we sit there and we think, we understand that home ownership is the way to wealth and assets. So even though slavery happens, this was our first opportunity for economic growth. And if we had had this economic growth during that time, imagine what the state of Black home ownership and really the country, because when one wins and few can get up also, it makes for a better country in general. Now, my grandparents, 1900 to 1950, you might have grandparents or even parents, right, that are at least 73 years old, right? So again, we're not that far away from where we started. Now, during this time, whites had white-only buildings, white-only stores, but in addition to that, they also had wealth. If you know or shop at a company that says they were established in 1900 or 1800, it's because they had already amassed all of the wealth they needed to pass it down to generations. It's not enough to be rich. In order to pass down to generations, you must be wealthy. And wealth comes from entrepreneurship, and it comes from home ownership. And that's what they were able to amass at that time, and now over 100 years worth. But we also call this the golden age of Black businesses. We thrived during this time. This was the time of Black excellence, because even though we were in a situation of disparity, we had still built up communities across the country where we owned land, we owned businesses, and we still were able to move forward. The National Negro Business League was founded in 1909. That was when entrepreneurs were able to come together and build businesses and start the first generations of wealth. During that time, as you see, this is Tulsa, and this is Greenwood. I had the great opportunity to visit this last year. And there is a walk, a guided walk that you can take, and it will take you through the process of successful businesses and what happened within an 18-hour period of time. You can see here that they owned businesses, they owned churches, they had their own schools, they owned planes, hospitals. It was their own center. And at that time, Black wealth was truly realized because they were not able to shop in other stores. They patronized their own businesses, and by doing that, everyone flourished within the community. Now, an article, this is straight from the news. Negroes are really waking up. Thinking Negroes around Roxbury are now spending their money only in stores owned and operated by Negroes and in other stores where they find colored help. You might know that now as supporting Black businesses, right? Yelp has right now Black History. Yelp has a great list of all the Black businesses that you can patronize during the month of February. Very few Negroes are now spending their hard-earned dollars in places where they haven't a choice, a chance to secure jobs for themselves or their children. But more importantly, I want to take you back to the top. Negroes are really waking up. What does that mean to you? It means that they're seeing the light. They're starting to get the picture. They understand the game. They're starting to play it. But a lot of times, this brings us back to where we are right now. It's called staying woke. And depending on what news station you listen to, you can hear it being called wokeness. It's all the wokeness that's going on. We don't want to teach these things in the school. We don't want our kids in all this wokeness. But that was a Black term that was turned into a modern day slur. Wokeness meant the ability to open your eyes and understand what is happening to you and making sure that you see it coming and you understand the game. That means you are now awake. You see it clearly. You're not under some false guise that it's this way when it's not. So as you can see, this is a positive thing in the Black community. It was being woke, understanding, speaking out for justice, making sure that your voices are heard. That's what it means to be woke. Wokeness is not a term to be used because you don't want to know about Black history, about Black problems. We just want to get back to this. We don't have anything with this wokeness. The same word, but two different terms depending on who's speaking about it. But I can guarantee you, we always say, sis, stay woke, right? That is our term, and it's meant to encourage others to continue to move past disparity, to continue to move past injustice, and to keep our eyes open for opportunity as well as disparity that can be brought to our community. So the next time you hear someone say wokeness, give them another definition to go by, because that definition has been skewed with past and with secrecy. And the wokeness is what has us in a situation where Black history and history in general is being wiped from the schools. When the lion starts telling their story, that is the only time the tale changes for the hunter. Tulsa, Oklahoma, May 31st, 1921 to June 1st, 1921. This is called the Tulsa riots. Some also call them the Tulsa massacre. During that time, a Black man was in an elevator and a white woman came out of the elevator and accused him of being inappropriate with her. We have known for generations that white women tears have been getting Black men lynched since the beginning of time. During this time, a mob of police officers, residents, political figures grabbed their guns, their grenades, I know it's crazy, and everything they possibly have, and they took a pathway to what we know as Black Wall Street. During that time, so much wealth, homeownership, and entrepreneurship was achieved that it was named Black Wall Street on Greenwood Avenue. So when someone is prospering and you feel wronged, some people might feel like they need to get justice. So a group of people went down to Tulsa, down to Greenwood, and they demolished 30 years worth of progress, 30 years of home ownership, 30 years of entrepreneurship. During this time, they had their own bus route so that they could get to town and back in time. They had their own businesses. Although they were not allowed to own land everywhere, they still prospered and made it work. This, as you see, is the massive crowd flooding Greenwood Avenue. And as you see back here, they've set it on fire. They literally dismantled in 18 hours, 30 years worth of progress. That's what we call another economic detour. Tulsa is one example of riots and massacres that have leveled and demolished cities and changed the balance of economic wealth. The Race Riot Commission concluded that between 100 and 300 people were killed and more than 8,000 were made homeless over those 18 hours. This is what it looked like when they were done. You now have 8,000 people who have been displaced, who more than likely would never be able to recover financially from this. If you ever read the book Black Wall Street, which I had the great opportunity to pick up on Greenwood Avenue when I was there, there is a letter that was written to a man named Oliver from a friend of his in New York that said, I heard about the riots, and naturally, I'm sure you guys will flee and move further north. Here is $40 so that you can get a bus fare to New York or to Detroit so you can get out of this. And Oliver replied, no. I came here with the spirit of wealth. I came here with the spirit of dismantling adversity, and I am going to stay here and rebuild that same spirit. And he, along with many others, stayed, and they rebuilt until not too long after that, they had a highway built through Greenwood and displaced and removed. The homes that were rebuilt were now taken through eminent domain so that the highway could be built during that space. So although they rebuilt, it was then dismantled again. And now Greenwood has been built back again, but not nearly to the capacity that it was at that time. During that time, they had 600 businesses, 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores, 2 movie theaters, 6 private airplanes, 1 hospital, 1 bank, and its own school system. That's what they were able to amass, even with disparity. They literally went from this and this to this, and this in 18 hours. Because one woman claimed that a Black man was inappropriate to her. It wiped away generations of wealth. Now, my parents, the pathway to homeownership. And this one I feel, right? Because I was born into a generation of homeowners. I'm one of the blessed ones. My family lived in New Orleans. We owned property. I grew up in homeownership. As a little girl, I only knew homeownership. I always thought everyone owned their homes and could paint their walls and really make it whatever they wanted it. I had no idea that that was something that was a blessing to very few at that time. Now, during my grandparents' time, although they've built wealth and they've passed adversity, we have contract buyers, redlining, blockbusting, appraisal bias, Jim Crow laws, overinflated insurance premiums, displacement through eminent domain of thousands of people, property taxes 3 times higher than that of their white counterpart, and wage gaps. Last time I was here, I talked about redlining and blockbusting. But more importantly, this time, I want to talk to you about contract buyers. Imagine now if you purchased a home through a contract buying for $250,000 and your down payment was $12,500. You went into a contract buyer. What you got was a lemon. It needed repairs, rebuilding, but at least you had home ownership, right? So we've been through adversity. We can build up anything, even if it's torn down. We can continue to rebuild. All of us have been born and raised to continue to rebuild. You fall down, you rebuild. You fall down, you rebuild. Especially as entrepreneurs, we know that every time. Some of us are in a fall down phase right now in this crazy market, and some are still rebuilding and some are already there, right? That's the same as this situation. So you have a house that's $250,000. You put down $12,500 and you get the home. You don't have the deed because the seller still has the deed. The seller will hold the deed until you've paid off your full $250,000. Now, you don't have access to an inspection or an appraisal, so you actually don't know if that home is actually worth $250,000. But what if I told you the home was actually only worth $100,000, but you paid $250,000 because you don't know any better? But what you do know is that you have to have home ownership, no matter what. But you've been paying into this towards that $250,000 for 2 years, and then you lose your job and you miss 1 month. You are now evicted from the home. You've lost the ownership, if what we could call ownership. You have now lost all the money that you've put into the home. And now you're done. 75 to 95% of all Black homeowners during the 1950s purchased through a contract buyer because they could not get financing during that time. If you've ever watched the movie The Banker, I highly, highly suggest it because 2 Black men found a way to use a white representative to get loans for Black people in the community. And those 2 Black men were imprisoned because of it. During this time, you also have higher property taxes. You have block busting. We're all realtors, so we understand what block busting is. Here's some of the things, here's on the record: legalized greed, home payments drags man to the grave. This particular man was so stressed out, they say, because he was losing everything through a contract buying process, that he had a heart attack and died. At least that's what his wife thinks. They're asking the judge to halt families' evictions because she missed a payment, and now her whole family of 7 is being kicked out, but she had home ownership. At least that's what she thought. Redlining, I'm sure a lot of you at this point have heard about the color of law, and that is the discriminatory practices that drew lines. If you were here, you could get insured. If you were in the red, that was do not touch. These were all Black communities, and those were considered to be high risk, hazardous communities because of the number of Black or brown people who lived there at that time. So you could not purchase anything in this area unless you had a contract buyer, because they were the only people that you could get a loan through to purchase, because there was no insured government financing. Also, if white people lived in the red area, they were given special financing to be able to move out of those areas and into these areas instead. Blockbusting. So we all went to real estate school, so we all know what that looks like. Real estate is the illegal practice of convincing homeowners that their neighborhood's going under. It's called white flight. Get out of the community as soon as you possibly can, or you're going to lose all of your wealth because there are more Black people moving into this neighborhood. Get out now. And realtors made their money off of selling property to Black people right? Sometimes they would sell it to a Black person so that they can then door knock. We all know about door knocking. So that they can then door knock and panic everyone to get out of here as soon as possible. Did you see the Black person that moved down the street? And at that time, the code of ethics by the National Association of Realtors did not allow anyone to put a Black person in a white neighborhood. You could lose your membership. It was against the code of ethics. Attention white buyers, the largest restricted white community in Washington. Look at these homes now. Save your home, vote for segregation. Here is actual rules and regulations on racial restrictions. And as you see there, this realtor discriminations. That's what was going on during my parents' time. The Fair Housing Act. Homeownership right now for Blacks is lower now than it was prior to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So an act that was put in place to help us, to give us a level field, was nothing more than another economic detour. We want white tenants in our white communities, real estate exploitation, produce. Now, here's a fun fact. Although we think slavery has ended and it's been a long time, the last Civil War veteran died in 1959. That's how close it is to us. I'm sure plenty of you were born during that time, grew up during that time, have parents who were during that time, but that's what that looks like. So now here's my error, the happy error I call. Parents, children, grandchildren, you more than likely have someone during this time. That's me, right? And that was only 0 to 43 years. And as I said, until lions write their own history, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Now, another example of displacement similar to Seneca Village is the Centennial Olympic Park. This was an area that was predominantly Black at the time. And through eminent domain, they removed about 6,000 people from public housing. They removed about 8,000 people in general. And this was the displacement. So they say 70% of them were Black. In total, there was 30,000 people removed and displaced from that community to build Centennial Olympic Park. And that was to prepare for the Olympics to come to Atlanta. That was not that long ago. We're talking the 90s at that time. Now, when I was here last time, I showed this to you. This is the exact slide. And I said at that time, what we need to do as realtors is to change the headlines. That's what we can all do today. Just change the headlines. These are the stories that are being told about us to the community. Wells Fargo, these are the things that are holding Black homeownership down and suppressed. Although economic detours back then in Tulsa meant to burn down communities, that's not common now. These are the modern day version of burning down communities. Wells Fargo, we know Wells Fargo, right? Black real estate agent handcuffed during house showing houses while Black. Realtor prospective home buyer illegally detained by police after retired cop calls 911. Agent name and discrimination expose face discipline from state. Long Island divided. Wells Fargo rejected half of their Black homeowner refinancing applications. Redfin settles digital redlining case. These were all the things that I talked about when I was here last, and that was in May. Since then, here's a new slide. Another economic detour. These are all the things, and as you see, a lot of it you've heard about. is what we know as appraisal bias. You purchase the home high, but if the appraiser comes by and there's Black people in the house, they devalue it. There are cases where that same house had a white family pretend to be the owners and it was immediately valued higher. Here's the issue. Couple alleges bias in appraisal. Black Americans still face challenges chasing home ownership. A Black couple had a white friend show their home and its appraisal rose by nearly $500,000. The DOJ intervenes in Black couple's home appraisal lawsuit. Katie couple sues condo, that was just last year, after allegedly being prohibited from buying the property because of their race. Didn't even pretend on that one. CFPB orders Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo has some issues, right? But that's for another day. Black Americans are falling behind in homeownership at 44.7%. Housing experts say closing the wealth gap is crucial for aspiring home buyers. Remember, we understand that back then you had to own a home. A Black man had to own a home just to vote. We know homeowners are the ones who make the rules. He who owns the land makes all the rules. Black homeownership is important. And what I'm here to show you is not to point fingers, but it's to give you a quick glimpse on how economic detours can slow the growth for generations. Now, one would say that we've made progress. We've had a Black president. We do have home ownership. We have Black realtors that can now be a part of an association called the National Association of Realtors, although at that time we could not. We were denied membership, and that's where NAREB came, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, because in 1947, we could not be realtors. But we still had to represent people. And so we created our own association called the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, and we just celebrated 75 years of fighting for democracy. That's who NAREB is. Now, one of the things that NAREB does is produce a 2020 State of Housing in Black America. If you want to review the report, here's a QR code down here. It will take you directly to the report. That report comes out annually in the fall. And what this 2022 report says is that 2021 was a strong year for single family mortgage market with twice as many mortgages. But despite the pandemic and rapid home prices, applications and originations were up year over year. Although Blacks represent 12% of the US population, they receive only 7% of the mortgages. Here are my recommendations if you want to know more about your history, because this is all of our history. Here are my book recommendations. You can scan the QR code and that will bring you there, as well as some of my other ones. Now, Malcolm X says, progress. We all say, well, we've made progress. We've made progress. But here's what he said. If there is a 9-inch knife in my back and it is pulled out 6 inches, that's not progress. If it's pulled out completely, that is not progress. Progress cannot begin until the wound has healed. So we say there's been progress, but the Institute for Policy Studies that continuation of trends, if we stay just where we are right now, it will take Black families 228 years from today to amass the wealth that whites have today. So if we take the knife out right now and we heal the wound today, it will still take the Black community 228 years to get there. But you know, on the slide, my great-great-grandparents were 173 years away. In most cases, we're only 173 years away from slavery, but it's going to take us 228 years starting today when the knife is removed to build wealth that whites have today. Let that sit with you for a while. Now, what can you do moving forward? Right? This is a heavy topic. I understand. I feel your energy, but it's okay because today we have options. And I don't know if you've heard this story before, but are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean? I personally would have said the egg, right? Because it's protein. You know, I'm thinking about the logical part of it. Like, well, I could probably get more from an egg, so I'd rather be an egg, right? And I don't want to be a carrot, and I don't drink coffee. But some of y'all probably chose coffee, right? Like, ooh, but the coffee will get me through the day. Coffee will make me be nicer to people, you know, whatever that looks like. But there's a story about a daughter who went to her mother, and she was complaining about adversity. And the mother had 3 pots. And in each pot, she boiled a carrot, an egg, and a coffee bean. And this is what she said. When that pot of water boiled, the carrot started hard and then became soft during adversity. The egg was fragile and soft, but during adversity, it became hard. The coffee bean created coffee. It changed the water. It changed the environment. It was under adversity, and it changed the environment. So my goal for all of you is to be the coffee bean. That's what we can do. We can change the headlines, and we can be the coffee bean. We're all going through adversity, the Black community especially. But our ancestors weren't carrots. Our ancestors surely weren't eggs. And for every Tulsa out there, we were the coffee bean. We continue to build through adversity. So we, as realtors, we need to change the headlines, and we need to be the coffee bean. As long as we can do that, we will be perfectly fine. And I want to end this with a really popular but impactful poem. It's called Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like sun, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I am a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and I am the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Happy Black History Month.
Thank you. Do we have time for some questions? Anybody have questions for Ms. Shanta?
Thank you so much for the presentation. A lot of people that are in are elected leaders, a lot of people that are in city government. As we travel throughout the state with the California Association of Realtors, I've had the pleasure of serving on the Investment Housing Committee, and we tour affordable housing communities. And it seems like a lot of government really is, they spend a lot of money on keeping people in a rental situation. Throughout the state, I mean, in Sacramento, we often spend $400,000 per door to build a new rental housing community for affordable tenants. When we were in LA, we toured a community that was $600,000 per door to build a one-bedroom, one-bath unit that would keep people in a rental situation for generations. How do we help these leaders rethink getting that money into home ownership situations?
Well, I would say first,
Thank you.
thank you. I would say first, you need to get on the boards of the planning commissions, on the economic boards. You have to be there to be a voice for reason. NAR is about property rights, right? So they are only focused on property rights, keeping homeowners in homes. But their goal is not necessarily to bring up new home buyers, because everyone can't be a homeowner. So for situations like this, you have to go directly to the source and start sitting on those boards so you can have a voice. The other thing I would encourage you to do, and scan my QR code and you'll see my video. I'm a co-founder of Make Homes Possible. It is a local Las Vegas coalition to put 25,000 Black families in homes. And we do this by bringing in the state and the city along with local nonprofits, HUD counseling agencies, and we go directly into the community and we handle the adversity, whether that is lack of financial literacy, down payment assistance. We go boots on the ground to the people. We've only been around for about 18 months and we've already put over 50 families in homes. So what you can do is get on the boards, but you can also create your own pathway to putting Black people in houses. And you have to continue to bring the conversation of affordable housing. You have to continue to question new developments for rental housing, for apartments, for any of those things. You've got to have a seat at the table, and then you have to build your own Tulsa. And if you can do those two things, we can combat the Black homeownership rate, which is at 41.4%. White homeownership rate is at 74.1%. So we can see the big gap. So really what you need to do is get involved. I love the Realtor Association and NAREB and all those, but it's only so much you can do sitting on those boards. What you need to do is go into the community and get on those boards and make the change, because they're the ones making all the decisions for everyone.
Thank you.